Murdaugh family name was well known. They are a legendary legal family.
If they had your case, you were going to win.
Alec and Maggie and Paul and Buster were very well liked in the community.
They were connected. Just one phone call to say, make this go away, and it does.
I don't think that I had any concept of how interesting and convoluted this thing was going to become.
This is Alec Murdaugh. My wife and child just shot badly.
A high-profile family has lost both a mother and a son, both shot and killed.
The shock of it was huge for our entire community.
For a family that seemed squeaky clean, and to watch it all crumble around them.
Her body was found by boaters on Sunday.
Oh, she's right. Yeah.
There is yet another case tied back to this family. 19-year-old Stephen Smith, whose body was found in the middle of a rural road.
The only name that was given to me was the murder name.
Gloria Satterfield died, and a lot of money was recovered by Alex Murdaugh. Alex was charged with and agreed that he stole $9 million from his clients. The assistant United States District Attorney said, no, he stole $10.5 million.
With this story, you really just cannot make it up. It is crazier than a movie script. We're talking fraud, money laundering, and murder, all to prop up his power and prestige. It's really just completely outrageous.
Behind closed doors, the center of it all, family patriarch, Alec Murdaugh.
Once that video was unveiled to the courtroom, there was an audible gasp.
It was just so bad. They did it so bad.
Really wasn't expecting this level of drama. It was just one revelation after the other.
Okay, wait a second. He's been lying this whole time.
I did lie to them.
One man controlled this crime scene, and that was Alec.
Bombshell accusations now from Alec Murdaugh defense attorneys.
So we have filed a motion for a new trial.
You thought it must now be over, but it just kept going from there.
Oh, what a tangled web we weave.
The Low Country would be defined as that area from about Georgetown, South Carolina, to the Georgia-South Carolina border. It is a coastal area. It's very picturesque. You've got lots of navigable waters, a lot of boating, water sports, and a lot of hunting.
Friendly people, very rural. I think we got 4 stoplights. So it's not very big.
I have always taken pride in the fact that even though we live in this small little community, everybody looks out for everybody.
The Murdaugh family name was well known in the Hampton area. It'd be a legendary legal family in the entire area. They basically controlled everything from the early 1900s through their law firm and through the 14th Circuit Solicitor's Office. They had all that power when it came to the criminal side of things.
The Murdaughs win just every case that they ever tried. If they had your case, you were going to win. If the Murdaugh was coming for you, you had no way of winning.
I've known the Murdaugh family my entire life. We grew up together. Our kids were growing up together. In Hampton, the Murdaugh family would have big parties out there on Friday or Saturday nights, and that was where we went. That was a big part of our high school, building fires and hanging out and partying. They took pride in knowing somebody when you need help. Just one phone call to say, make this go away, and it does, it goes away.
Alec and Maggie and Paul and Buster were very well liked in the community. They could not go into a public place without Alec going up to anyone and everyone and greeting them. Whenever there was a family in need, and Alec and Maggie really did pitch in and help. That law firm has done a lot in the community. Fundraisers, have a big Christmas toy drive and things like that.
Their reputation was good, but also many people feared them at any point because of the power that they held in the entire area. Just understand, this is a family with all kinds of power. It's almost like a Southern mafia family.
They put people in positions. They put magistrates in their jobs. They put people in law enforcement. They were connected all the way up to the White House. And if anyone needed help of any kind, that's where you would go.
A tragic boat crash in February of 2019 that took the life of 19-year-old Mallory Beach involved the Murdaug's youngest son, Paul. And really, it was the catalyst for the takedown of this powerful family. Mallory Beach was 19 years old, and by all accounts, an effervescent young woman, just had a lot of good energy. Anthony Cook was the boyfriend of Mallory Beach and also a friend of Paul Murdaug's, the son of Alec Murdaugh.
My name is Beverly Cook, and I am Anthony Cook's mother. When Anthony and Paul were very young, they became good friends, and Paul was a privileged child. He had money. He came from a prominent family, but he felt like he was only allowed to act a certain way at certain times. But when he was at our house, he didn't have to do that. He could just be himself. That day, Anthony and Mallory were at our house, and I remember it vividly. I knew they were going out that night. They told me they were going to Paul's River house. I remember them leaving the house very clearly, and "I love you" was the last thing that we said.
How this all started was a bunch of kids who wanted to go out drinking. Paul Murdaugh went to the convenience store. He's underage, but he's using his brother's ID. He's even caught on tape coming out of the store, holding the beer, the seltzers in his hands, holding them over his head like in a celebration factor, saying, "Look at what I did, look at what the rest of the day holds for us."
These were all young friends, all in the ages of 19, 20 years old, all underage. You have Connor Cook, Miley Altman, Connor Cook's girlfriend. You have Anthony Cook, Connor's cousin, Mallory Beach, Morgan Dowdy, and of course, Paul Murdaugh. They began the evening by getting on board the boat and went for a joyride for several hours. Ultimately, they found themselves in Beaufort, pulling up to a dock there. No one really wanted to stop except Paul Murdaugh.
Connor and Paul went inside a restaurant to get more drinks, while the other four were walking alongside that dock instead. So what we're looking at is the group basically walking down the dock area of Beaufort right now. Anthony and Mallory are together. You can see Paul staggering a little bit along with Morgan right there. At this point, Paul believed that he should be driving despite the fact that he had obviously been drunk.
So Paul drank from a young age, and he had an alter ego called Timmy, and he'd sort of become more scrappy and looking for a fight. Paul was so drunk that by the time he gets in the boat with everyone, they start to see signs of Timmy has arrived. So Paul was driving really erratically. He would speed up and he would slow down and he would go in sort of loops and show them that he was in control. It didn't matter what they said. They're becoming increasingly more worried, and little did anyone know that they were seconds away from their lives changing forever.
Where's your emergency?
We're in a boat crash on Arthur Creek.
Are you at the dock?
We're in the boat.
Okay.
We have someone missing.
There were people screaming, there were people in the water, people were crying for several of the other kids in the boat were injured.
There's 6 of us and one is missing.
When the boat crash happened, it's a chaotic situation out there. Mallory Beach ends up in the water, and immediately the question is, where is she? You can hear it on the tape, and it's panic in their voices. At that point, everyone's not exactly sure what's happening. Then you get police to come on the scene.
Mom, there's 50 cops here, Coast Guard, everything. We can't find Mallory. It's been 30 minutes.
When we got that phone call, I was shocked to hear Anthony on the end of the line.
Y'all need to come to me for quick. We hit a bridge in the boat. Connor's up. Morgan's messed up bad. We can't find Mallory, Mom.
He doesn't say the F word to me. Ever, ever, ever. But just the fact that he said that word to me immediately, I knew something was bad.
Oh, you smiling like you're funny. My girlfriend's gone, folks. You think it's funny? Oh, he's right. Hell.
I mean, what else can you do but be angry in that moment? And so he lashed out because he knew that nobody was going to do anything to Paul about it.
Anthony was in the back of the boat, and he was trying to protect Mallory, but ultimately she was thrown from his lap when they hit that bridge.
She's at the bottom of the river.
Anthony, he knows in that moment that Mallory is not coming back.
Hey, I'm with Department of Natural Resources. Who was driving the boat? Right, y'all picked up.
The last time I grabbed my girlfriend and got down in the bottom of the boat, Paul was driving.
Y'all know Alec Murdoch?
Oh, yeah, I know that name.
That's his son. Good luck.
My name's Jim Griffin. I started representing Paul in the boating accident. And they ultimately took the kids to the hospital. And then in the hospital, Alec and his dad show up. And Alec is visiting with the people in the boating accident and their parents.
Paul was obnoxious, obviously and clearly impaired significantly. He was blockaded by his father and grandfather from law enforcement. And ultimately, his medical blood was something in the 0.24 range. Our legal level, like most states today, is a 0.08.
And I think his grandfather said it best. He said, you know, he's drunker than Cooter Brown.
Alec Murdoch was at the hospital for one primary reason, and it was not emotional support. It was to clear Paul's name and to clear the family name.
The Murdochs said Connor should not talk to the police, shouldn't talk about who was operating the boat, and that everything was going to be taken care of. Connor's parents were concerned because they felt that there was an intimidation factor. Well, there's nothing worse than a wrongful accusation, except a wrongful conviction. And I wanted to make sure that that did not occur.
The next morning, news of the boat crash and Mallory's disappearance hit social media.
Horrifying. A boat slams into a bridge, a girl is missing.
19-year-old Mallory Beach hasn't been seen since a boat she and 5 friends were riding in hit a piling in Archers Creek on Sunday morning.
A helicopter, 11 different boats, and 7 divers have been combing the waters in and around that area.
Anthony had been going down to the bridge first thing every morning. He was just so distraught. He just wanted to find her. Maggie and Paul and Alec came out to the bridge. They were their normal selves. They were politicking is what I call it. Just smiling and shaking hands and saying everything's gonna be okay. We're here, what can we do? I was in the truck by myself watching the helicopters and praying, and I heard somebody get in the back seat, and it was Maggie. She chit-chatted just a little bit, and she finally asked me, "What do you think will happen if they never find her?" And I think that hit me like a ton of bricks. I don't know how you can even say that. She could feel the tension and exited the vehicle. That's when my mind started going crazy, thinking that that was not an option. It was hurtful, but it was expected. I mean, it just did not surprise me at all because it's just who they were.
The search for Mallory Beach went on for 5 days. They called it a rescue mission. They were desperately trying to find her alive.
On Sunday, we had all gone to church together. Mallory's family, our family, everybody. And then later, we were home, and I got a call. That's how I found out that they had found her. And Anthony, he was curled up in his bed with her sweater. And we had to tell him. And then it was like it had happened all over again. It was just, I can't describe that moment.
Mallory was missing for more than a week. Her body was found by boaters in the Broad Creek Marina area on Sunday. As for what happened that night, it's still under investigation.
Well, drowning and blunt force trauma to the head after the crash, that's what an autopsy showed as the reason that Mallory Beach died.
The fact that Mallory's body was found is significant because she could have been lost at sea, and her cause of death might not have been known. For Paul and his family, the finding of her body also put more pressure on them. And social media is getting more and more heated. The hashtag Justice for Mallory was established. They're calling out law enforcement for protecting the Murdaughs.
Online, you had a lot of people who said he should pay for this. At the same point, I think a lot of people never believed that he would ever stand trial or ever truly pay the price because there was a Murdaugh involved.
There was this outrage online from many social media users about how long it was taking for Paul Murdaugh to be charged. They were implying that law enforcement may have been protecting the Murdaughs from any consequences.
Where is the state or federal investigation of all these local officials who've been protecting this family?
And this is really when people started to get upset because this is when they realized how much power this family had.
I don't think that I had any concept of how interesting and convoluted this thing was going to become.
It was unclear if Paul was going to face any consequence for this crash. It would be weeks until we would see charges filed in the case. And in fact, it took until April 18th, 2019 for charges to be filed, and that happened to be Mallory's birthday.
Paul Paul eventually gets charged with felony boating under the influence causing death and causing serious bodily injury. And his lawyers were ready to take this to trial if it came to that.
Paul Murdaugh sat silently for most of his arraignment hearing. Murdaugh's attorney made his plea of not guilty to 3 felony counts and waived the hearing of any charges.
So now that Paul has pleaded not guilty, he's actually released on something called a personal recognizance bond. It's a PR bond. Basically, a judge reviews someone's criminal history. And in this case, it's determined that Paul does not pose a threat to the community.
We asked for a PR bond. In South Carolina, unless it's a murder case, you have a constitutional right to a bond, and he got the bond.
We're going to set a personal recognizance bond in the amount of $50,000.
A lot of Mallory's family felt like the amount of the bond was a slap in the face to them. There would not be accountability. We wanted him to own up to what had happened, to admit what happened, to be sorry for what happened, to feel responsibility.
With a team of expensive and high-powered attorneys in place, Alec Murdaugh was going to make sure that his son didn't have to follow the same procedure that any old Joe would, including that typical jailhouse mugshot.
This is the photo that was taken of Paul after his arraignment. Usually when somebody's arrested, they have a mugshot taken, but he's not wearing an orange jumpsuit. He's wearing this sort of plaid shirt. He looked like the employee of the month for J. Crew and not somebody who had just been arrested for 3 felony counts of boating under the influence.
He didn't even have to go through what anybody else would, including just being booked properly.
Paul was not the devil. He had moments that he could be like that, but that was not his true soul. Personally, I think a lot of the times that Paul was acting out is because he was fighting within himself and he was struggling to figure out who he really was and who he was going to be. Paul was a young, messed up kid who needed help, but the family, they were covering things up instead of trying to help him.
After Paul's first court appearance, social media really sort of lit up. A lot of people in support of Mallory Beach. I think most people were just really outraged that it seemed Paul Murdaugh was using his family name to get preferential treatment.
On social media, people can just unload. And it just caught wind. It's a place that is not news, it's just a gossip column. And so that affected the family. I can understand why people felt like this was privileged treatment, but honestly, the Attorney General, that's how they do it.
So this is the first time that people got to speak out on anything about the Murdaugh family without apparent repercussions.
As the Murdaugh's defense team was preparing to go to trial, Paul was facing up to 30 years in prison for this, but they were able to delay this for about 2 years. Until June of 2021, when the very fabric of the Murdaugh legacy starts coming apart at the seams.
Hampton 911 with your emergency. This is Alec Murdaugh at 4147 Moselle Road. I need the police to answer immediately. My wife and child just got badly.
This is the 911 call recording of Alec on June 7th.
I just I can see his brain.
Okay, did you hear anything, or did you come home and find out?
No, but I've been gone. I just came back.
This is the firearm you brought from inside the house?
Sir, yes, sir. I went and got, this is a long story. My son was in a boat wreck a few months back. He's been getting threats. Most of it's been benign stuff we didn't take serious.
Okay.
You know, he's been getting, like, punched. I know that's what it is.
My immediate thought was it had to be some deranged person who wanted to take the law in their own hands because they thought Paul Murdaugh was going to get away with the murder of Mallory Beach.
You just wonder, how could something like this happen? Is someone targeting them?
Alec Murdaugh is questioned at the scene that night by SLED, which is the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, and the SLED agents take him to their car.
What comes to my mind is my son Paul was in a boat wreck a couple years ago. There's been a lot of negative publicity about that, and there's been a lot of people online just really vile stuff. I came home, I was up at the house, I laid down, took a nap on the couch, probably, I don't know, 25, 30 minutes. I got up, I called Maggie, didn't get an answer. I left the house and went to my mom's for just a little while. I came back here. I mean, I pulled up and I could see him, and, you know, I knew something was bad. It was my boy over there, I could see. And I ran over to Maggie, and actually, I think I tried to turn Paul over. I tried to take their pulse on both of them.
What I find so shocking is that people who hear that think he's acting, and I don't know why they think that.
What do you get out of killing Maggie and Paul? Maybe he was sick of Paul in the sense of, like, Paul had caused all this trouble for the family. Now, Alec was the widower, he's lost his son. There's an air of sympathy for him.
You got to remember that this is sort of a small community, and he's well known. So perhaps it wasn't odd that they didn't immediately go to the darkest place. But Alec Murdaugh was being afforded a lot of courtesies that other people wouldn't get.
Sorry.
So he was never detained, never put into a position where he was truly a person of interest.
Immediately after Paul and Maggie were murdered, 2 days later, Randolph Murdaugh died. And so Alec's grieving over the loss of his wife and son and dad, and he is not functioning, honestly. He really was a broken man.
As if there weren't enough madness in this case, now there was another case that had rumors flying. The murders of Maggie and Paul end up bringing attention to another death that has connections to the Murdaugh family. The bodies certainly seem to be piling up, you know, in the Low Country. I mean, first you got Mallory Beach, then Maggie and Paul, and now another death seems to be unaccounted for.
When Maggie and Paul were killed, everybody connected it back and started that rumor mill again about how the Murdaugh family may have been involved in Stephen Smith's murder just a few years previously.
The night of July 8th, 2015, Stephen Smith was driving home. He was coming home late at night, at 2 o'clock in the morning, and his car broke down on a very dark stretch of road about 3 miles from Alex and Maggie Murdaugh's home at Mazzell. And supposedly what happened is he began walking down a dark country road to his home, and something happened. Some truck driver was driving down the road, and the truck driver called 911.
Hampton County 911, where's your emergency?
Hello, I just going down the Crockerville Road. I see somebody laying out in the roadway. Somebody going to hit him.
Stephen Smith, 19 years old, was found dead lying in the middle of Sandy Run Road.
My name is Sandy Smith, and I'm Stephen Smith's mother. I was on my way to work in Hampton on the car. I heard on this radio station that there was a body thrown out of a car on Sandy Run. Didn't think nothing about it. Stephen is a twin, and his sister's name is Stephanie. And later on, she called me, and she said, by the way, did Stephen spend the night with you last night? And I knew right there that that was my baby in that road. My heart started pounding and went straight to my stomach. And it was like, it just started shaking. It's devastating. hard to move on from that. We were first told that it was a gunshot wound. Later, we were told that he was beaten by a blunt object. Then the final cause was pedestrian versus vehicle. While he was walking to get gas, well, he had his cell phone and his key in his pocket, but his wallet was still in the car. So how are you gonna get gas with your wallet still in the car?
The pathologist reached the conclusion that Stephen Smith was hit by a car and killed, and that it was a hit and run. But his clothes weren't ripped, his sneakers were still on. He had a couple of abrasions on his hand, on the inside of his arms, but the lion's share of his injuries were to his head. If you're ever hit by a car, you would have broken pelvis or broken knees. You would be thrown a long way, and you would tumble, and your clothes would rip. Shoes just get blown off your body. So it almost looked like Stephen was hurt or wounded or killed somewhere else, and he was laid down there. The investigators do interviews. Kids that they went to school with blamed Buster for Stephen's death. And that's why the Murdaugh name starts to be interwoven in the investigative file.
I did hear a few names, but I don't want to, say it over the phone.
The only name that was given to me was the Murdaugh name.
For 6 years, Sandy Smith was a mother who lived without an answer of how her child died.
Stephen graduated from Wade Hampton High School in 2014. He knew Buster as a classmate.
Buster Murdaugh is Alec and Maggie's older son. To the public, Buster looks like he's sort of this quiet kid. He wasn't a bad seed like Paul was perceived to be. Buster sort of seen just as like uber snobby.
Before Stephen passed away, he did tell me that he was fixing to go deep sea fishing. And I said, oh, cool, who are you going with? And he said, a friend. Said a prominent friend. I said, oh, okay. I said, where are you going? He said, Key West. Never thought about it until somebody told me that there was a bunch of pictures posted of the Murdaughs in Key West deep sea fishing. Then it was like, is there some kind of connection here?
People would pick on Stephen for being gay, so then, you kind of figure out that's not how people in Hampton think you should be. Stephen never hid who he was. He was always who he was, regardless of who liked him and who didn't.
He knew we loved him. We supported him in whatever he did.
That's looked down upon by a lot of people in Hampton County and in the South.
There is yet another case tied back to this family that has gone unsolved for years, and it wasn't until Paul and Maggie's murders that investigators gave this case a closer look.
Social media seemed to be on fire about connections between Buster Murdaugh and the Stephen Smith death. But even though there were tips that had come in, he was never interviewed in the case and wasn't charged either.
SLED made it sound like they found something that would implicate Buster or Alec in Stephen Smith's death. And that ran like wildfire. And it was so defamatory to Buster. He's been through so much, and these rumors just kept building. This is Maggie Murdaugh's Facebook page, and some really sick comments. Buster is gay, and his father either knew or was about to find out, and poor Stephen's death was ignored. Hey, this is so not true, and B, so disgusting, and C, I mean, why would someone go on Maggie Murdoch's Facebook page with her family and desecrate it like that? I mean, it's a desecration. To this day, SLED won't come out and say Buster had nothing to do with it. And yet he's been twisting in the wind. During the investigation, Buster's name came up a few times. The highway patrolman, he can't even identify the original source for Buster's name. And it was just rank speculation. People were trying to associate Buster with Stephen Smith, which there's no connection whatsoever.
Well, we're aware of no credible evidence that would link Buster Murdaugh to the death of Stephen Smith.
We have a wooden cross where Stephen was found, and it has Stephen's name on it. I want everyone to see it because there's somebody out there that knows something. I want you to remember where my son took his last breath.
Now that the details of Stephen Smith's death have really resurfaced, right on the heels of Paul and Maggie's death, the suspicions in this community are really starting to percolate. And Buster and Alec seem to be on trial in the court of public opinion. And their dynasty is sort of on the edge.
So basically every day, we're waiting to hear if somebody's going to be arrested for the murders of Maggie and Paul. But then Labor Day weekend happens. And now we have the man at the center of it all getting shot at.
Hampton County 911 was an emergency.
I got a flat tire, and I stopped, and somebody stopped to help me. And when I turned my back, they tried to shoot me.
As if the murders weren't crazy enough, now another member of the Murdaugh family has been shot.
Oh, okay. Were you shot?
Yes, I'm bleeding a lot.
What part of your body?
I'm not sure. Somewhere on my head. I'm bleeding pretty bad.
What's your name?
Alex Murdaugh.
Andrew Davis out here in Hampton County right now with the story that really everybody is talking about.
My initial reaction was, is everybody being targeted? Then you get on scene and you start to understand what's going on.
It was somewhere after 1:30 today. He claims he was on the side of the road trying to change a tire. Two men came up and then opened fire on him.
Do we have a serial killer on our hands? Do we have someone who's targeting this family specifically, and why?
Alec gets shot in the side of the head. And there's an entrance wound right behind the ear and an exit wound sort of in the rear of the head, but it didn't kill him.
Once Alex sits down with SLED agents to give them more details about the shooting, he also gives them a detailed description of the suspect. Based on this, police put together a sketch of the assailant who allegedly shot Alec.
When they held that mugshot up, I mean, I was just in shock because at a glance, my first thought was he was trying to describe my son. And it went viral. I mean, somebody took one of Anthony's pictures and put it beside this sketch and saying, looks like he was trying to point the finger at Anthony the whole time.
Immediately, the internet starts going crazy. There was a lot of doubt out there. Everything seemed suspicious, and the public was definitely seeing it.
Just 2 days after this mysterious and bizarre shooting, Alec Murdaugh announced that he was entering rehab for a drug addiction that he'd been struggling with for several years.
Alec had a severe opioid addiction. He'd been to detox a couple of times, but he'd never gone on to the rehab portion of treatment. And I think at Paul's boating accident and Paul's charges and the stress of that. I think that just sent him into further addiction.
As we continued to cover the Murdaughs on News Nation, we were just stunned by how many layers continued to be peeled back on this story.
Alec Murdaugh found his wife and son dead 3 months ago, and then just days ago, he says he was shot in the head on the side of the road. Now he is accused of stealing money from the powerful law firm that he helped create.
Alec Murdaugh's law firm alleged that over a period of 9 years, he had made $14 million, but he had stolen $7 million at the same time.
Now, Alec Murdaugh has been accused of financial crimes. And this is where social media really kicked in. And now they're hooked. So we were wondering, why isn't he getting arrested for this? Why isn't he being charged? And then we started to hear that there was a suspect in the shooting. So that became another explosive thing.
Overnight, investigators announced charges in connection to the shooting of Alec Murdaugh. South Carolina law enforcement officers arrested 61-year-old Curtis Smith for the roadside shooting that sent Alec Murdaugh to the hospital on September 4th.
Curtis Eddie Smith was a distant relative of Alec. Over time, they became friends, and Eddie was able to get Alec, drugs, opioid pills.
The big question on everyone's mind, why would Curtis Eddie Smith want Alec Murdaugh dead? Within a day of Smith's arrest, there were already people on social media who had their doubts about this attempt on Alec Murdaugh's life. People were already questioning whether this was a weird, sort of dark ploy by Alec Murdaugh himself. But then a recorded interview between SLED agents and Alec Murdaugh reveals the real reason behind this roadside shooting, and social media explodes when this new info comes to light. Just days after the roadside shooting, SLED Senior Special Agent Ryan Kelly conducted a telephone interview with Alec Murdaugh. His lawyers, Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin, were present. It was recorded, and there was a bombshell confession.
Curtis Eddie Smith is the primary person who I purchased pills from for years.
And some weeks you would give him how much money for pills?
We had weeks where there would be $40,000, $50,000, $60,000.
Alec spent more money than he had on drugs, and that caused him to steal money to support his drug habit. He was writing checks for drugs.
I told him that things were getting ready to get really bad, and that I would be better off not here. And I asked him to shoot me. And I think at first he was a little surprised, but then he said, okay.
Did you pay Curtis any money for this?
No, sir.
I'm gonna be honest, that doesn't make any sense to me.
I understand. I told him to follow me out, and that I would make a flat tire, and he would go past me and turn around and come back and do it.
So what was your intent?
For him to kill me. I thought that it would make it easier on my family for me to be dead. I have a fair amount of life insurance.
Do you remember how much?
Not off the top of my head, but like $10 million, $12 million.
So your intent was to have him kill you so he could collect your life insurance, right?
So my son could. I mean, I knew I was about to lose everything, and I figured he's better off that way.
If you believe Alec, he needed Cousin Eddie to help him take his own life, to get insurance money for his son. Not everybody believes that story. Some believe that Alec was hell-bent on making it look like Eddie was not only trying to kill Alec, but trying to kill his entire family.
He shot me.
Where did he shoot you? He missed and hit me in the very back of the head.
I do think he was feeling desperate. The number one most important thing in the Murdaugh family is preserving power and wealth. And so, at the very least, I can leave this legacy to my surviving son.
Curtis Eddie Smith gets arrested, and he's charged with conspiring with Alec. And to this day, he still has these charges hanging over his head. Eddie's story is that Alec asked him to shoot him, and Eddie didn't want any part of that. And either the gun went off accidentally or he accidentally knocked Alec over and Alec hit his head on the ground. So we don't quite know what happened.
To this day, Smith denies ever being Alec's drug dealer or ever even being a drug user himself.
Alec Murdaugh, one of the most powerful men in South Carolina, turned himself into police today.
The big thing on social media about the roadside shooting came up when Alec appeared in court in Hampton County for bond hearing. He was charged with insurance fraud and submitting a false police report.
Tonight, Alec Murdaugh out of jail and back in rehab. The once prominent attorney granted a $20,000 bond this afternoon and released on his own recognizance.
So that turned even more people against him specifically. Well, maybe he would then commit murder. What else was he doing to other people in Hampton County?
We started doing a lot of research into what other things that the Murdaughs might have been involved in. Then we found this obituary that showed Gloria Satterfield, the longtime housekeeper of Alec and Maggie Murdaugh, died under suspicious circumstances as well.
What was your emergency?
4147 Moselle Road.
What's going on out there?
My housekeeper has fallen and her head is bleeding. I cannot get her up.
Where'd she fall from?
She fell going up the steps, up the brick steps. She's on the ground. She's on the ground.
Is she conscious?
No, not really. Well, I mean, she's mumbling.
Gloria was rushed to a hospital. She had an internal brain bleed, and she had 12 broken ribs. And she died 3 weeks later. There was a petition in December of 2018 that asked court approval for the Gloria Satterfield $500,000 settlement. After her death, there was a claim made, and a lot of money was recovered by Alex Murdaugh. And none of the money went to the Satterfield family. I've never had a case where an attorney took every cent from a client. And, you know, quite frankly, I was in disbelief.
Once the news surfaced of another death connected to the Murdaugh family, and this one with financial swindling, social media just lit up, and everybody seemed to have a theory.
The Gloria Satterfield case ended up being a $4.3 million settlement. And we're not just talking about this one settlement.
He stole from not only the Satterfield family, but for a full 16 years, Alex Murdaugh was stealing from other clients. It's sad because his victims, they're people who come to the Murdaugh law firm in the most distressing of times. Alex was able to prey on these people because they didn't know any better, which is shameful. It's one of the worst financial abuses I've ever seen.
We know that there was money and that the clients didn't get it. So why isn't he getting arrested for this? So there began to be more calls online for law enforcement agents to do something.
South Carolina's law enforcement division arrested Alec Murdaugh in Florida right after his release from a drug rehabilitation facility in Orlando. He's accused of stealing $4.3 million in insurance settlement money from Gloria Satterfield's son.
And then in October of 2021, he just left his rehab and he got arrested in the Satterfield case. So that was the last day of freedom that he had.
We obtained arrest warrants of Alec. We needed to get him in custody as soon as possible. My name is Creighton Waters, and I was the lead prosecutor in the Murdaugh case. We came out with our first round of indictments against him in November of 2021, and ultimately he received a $7 million bond on those charges.
Alex was charged with and agreed that he stole $9 million. Emily Limehouse, the assistant United States District Attorney, said no, he stole $10.5 million.
That was momentous because we were seeing a Murdaugh in his family's courthouse, basically, in prison garb. So that was huge. There is a certain amount of satisfaction in that.
Right around this time, the Murdaugh saga goes sideways because SLED makes an announcement that Alec Murdaugh is actually a person of interest in the deaths of his own wife and son, Maggie and Paul.
In June of 2022, we had a meeting with the Attorney General, and we presented the evidence we need to go ahead and charge him. And so he was indicted for the murders in July.
It felt like kind of like a minor victory in the sense that, like, I'm seeing accountability happen.
Alec Murdaugh pleads not guilty, so that means this thing is headed to trial. The number one question, is this guy gonna get off? The ultimate judgment of the Murdaugh dynasty is now on the world stage. The trial of Alec Murdaugh begins on January 25th of 2023. Brian Enton is right there on the ground at the Colleton County Courthouse in South Carolina.
You know, actually, you always hear that saying, you can't make this up. I mean, with this story, you really just cannot make it up. It is crazier than a movie script.
Many people said it was the trial of the century. The prosecution's theory was that Alec Murdaugh actually committed the murders to take the focus off of the financial crimes that he was involved in. The house of cards were coming down on top of him.
You've got an extremely powerful, well-established Southern family. You have allegations that of power and influence and their effect on the system. On top of that, you have these two just horrific murders.
Going into the trial, we thought the state did not have sufficient proof or forensic evidence to prove that he committed the murder. And so we felt really good about our chances.
About a week into the trial, there's a standout moment that sparks a debate and really divides social media. SLED agent Jeff Croft testifies that he was 100% confident that in Alec's interview after the murders, that he said something potentially incriminating.
Your Honor, this time we're going to play Exhibit 243, the second interview of Alec Murdaugh.
And you definitely saw a traumatic picture, and I know it's hard. And sitting here talking today is tough.
It's just so bad. They did it so bad.
It sounds like to some that said, I did them so bad. So if you thought that Alec did it, this would be perfect proof that, yes, he did.
It's just so bad. They did it so bad.
Instead, others heard it as they did him so bad. And he's in sort of an emotional state, so it is very difficult to hear.
It's just so bad. They did it so bad.
Did he say I or they? This is something that the jury spent a good chunk of the day trying to decide. Take a listen to it slowed down this time.
It's just so bad. They did it so bad.
that was very hotly debated on social media. It was almost like 50-50. You either heard, I did him so bad, or they did him so bad. Personally, I think he said I.
Special Agent Croft said, I heard him say, I did him so bad. And when I listened to the recording, I couldn't say that was wrong. And I'm talking to the person who was actually in the car asking the question and having the conversation.
It sounded distinctly to me like they, and yet the person sitting next to me, a member of the press, said, well, I'm hearing I.
But people just hear what they want to hear. I think that's ultimately what that was about.
Almost like a Freudian slip. And their theory behind Freudian slips is that parts of our unconscious, parts of our feelings that we aren't in touch with kind of pop out at these kind of inopportune or strange times, but they tell the truth.
Get back. Get back. Then the key piece of evidence that proved the most damaging was introduced into the trial, the dog kennel video. On the night of the murder, Alec's son Paul was recording his friend's dog with his cell phone. What's key about this is that Alec has maintained that he was visiting his mother at the time the video was taken, that he was never at the dog kennel that night until he discovered Maggie and Paul.
Quit, Cash. Come, quit. It's okay. Come here.
Paul is there videotaping on his phone. You can see Cash the dog with his tail wagging, and Paul is trying to send that to his friend Rogan Gibson so that Rogan can determine whether or not they take his dog to the vet to get his tail looked at. I wanted the jury to hear Paul and Maggie's voice because that is the last time their voices would ever be heard by anyone on earth.
Hey, he's got a bird in his mouth.
Bubba. Hey, Bubba.
In the background, you can hear other voices, and those voices were very specifically identified as Maggie Murdoch
Hey, he's got a bird in his mouth.
and Alec Murdoch.
Come here, Bubba. It's a guinea.
This is a chicken.
Come here, Bubba.
Come here, Cash.
Come here, Bubba.
Cash.
At that moment, we said, okay, wait a second. He's been lying this whole time about never being down there at the kennel.
Cell phone data shows that it was recorded at 8:44 p.m. that night. This now places Alec Murdoch at the murder scene just minutes before his wife and son were shot and proves that he was there minutes before the murder.
Once that video was unveiled to the courtroom, there was an audible gasp. It was the thing that you see in drama series, not in real life. There's rarely this piece of evidence as large as this one that just sort of turns everything on its head in real time.
I think the kennel video gave me a level of comfort that let me believe that we could prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt.
The other video that was very significant in this case was a Snapchat video from Paul's phone that was taken a couple hours before the murders.
It showed Alec standing with one of the trees that just wasn't wanting to stand up.
Better than it was, ain't it?
It wasn't uploaded until 7:56 that night, which is less than an hour before Paul was killed. The video itself shows Alex in loafers, a pair of khakis, and a seafoam green shirt at this point. But when he talks to investigators later, he's in a white t-shirt and a pair of shorts and a different pair of shoes entirely, and we've never found that seafoam shirt, pants, or shoes again. The question would be, why did he change the clothes? And more than that, where did those clothes go? The implication would be that there was something that would tie him to the murders on the clothes themselves, and that's why we've never found them again.
But once the family's current housekeeper, Blanca Simpson, takes the stand, Alec Murdoch's clothes become a bigger point of contention with the shocking information she reveals.
You recognize those pants in stage 7?
Yes, sir.
How do you recognize them?
I took care of the laundry.
Blanca described the clothes that Alec was wearing, that those clothes, after the crime, she never saw those again.
And he sort of started to plant the seed with her that he was not wearing an outfit
He was pacing back and forth in the living room, and he said, "I got a bad feeling." He said, "I got a bad feeling." He said, "Something's not right." He said, "You remember the shirt I was wearing, that Vinnie Vine shirt?" In my mind, it was the polo shirt. I didn't say anything, but I was kind of thrown back because I don't remember that. I don't remember him wearing that shirt that day when he left. I know what shirt he was wearing because I fixed the collar, and the collar's a different material.
What this testimony effectively was suggesting was that Alec Murdaugh may have tried to sway Blanca into telling investigators, if they asked, that he was wearing one thing when in fact he was wearing something different.
It was unusual to be seeing a paid employee of the family speak out in a way that was against the narrative of the family. But she stuck to her own values, and she told the truth.
And it was probably, at that point, one of the most anticipated moments of the trial, knowing that Buster was coming to the stand. What could he say at that point? Would he support his father?
Be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Buster came up to the stand that day. And the courtroom was a packed house. There was not an empty seat there.
Buster's testimony was the first time a lot of people were hearing Buster speak.
My dad called me on the phone. He asked me if I was sitting down, and I was like, yeah. And then he, sounded odd, and then he told me that my mom and brother had been shot. I kind of just sat there for a minute. I was in shock. But eventually we got our stuff together and drove down to Moselle.
Do you remember what time you got to Moselle?
I got there sometime probably around 2 o'clock in the morning.
And when you got there, did you see your dad?
Yes, sir.
What kind of condition was he in? What was his demeanor?
I mean, he was destroyed. He was heartbroken. I walked in the door and saw him and gave him a hug and just broken down.
Could he speak?
Not really.
You crying?
Yes, sir.
Buster Murdaugh on the stand was effectively just a full-throated support of his father, tearing down every claim that the prosecution had made. And if you looked at Alec, you could really see him smiling and nodding along as if to acknowledge the support he was getting.
It was another day at the office in some ways, and just doing exactly what he was asked, but doing it in a very robotic, almost emotionalist way.
Buster seemed to me like somebody who had put his emotions aside and was like a soldier. You don't show emotion because emotion is weakness. It's very difficult to change the way you've coped with life for years.
The question came up from the beginning, would Alec take the stand? And a lot of people questioned that and said, we still don't believe it's going to happen.
As a criminal defense lawyer, whether you put your client on the stand is always a very difficult decision, but ultimately that is one of the decisions that your client makes.
It was only when he finally stood up and they said, do you want to testify? And he said yes. And then we were in for the theater of it all.
This was Alec's final closing argument, the closing argument of his lifetime. It was his opportunity one more time to stand up there and look at a jury and win them over like he had done so many times before.
Mr. Murdaugh, on June 7th, 2021, did you take this gun or any gun like it and shoot your son Paul in the chest in the feed room at your property off Moselle Road?
No, I did not.
Did you drive down to the kennels in your Suburban?
I did.
What'd you see?
Saw what y'all have seen pictures of. So bad.
Did you see them on the ground when you're pulling up in your Suburban?
I did.
And what'd you do when you came to a stop, Alec?
I think I jumped out of my car. I know I ran back to my car, called 911.
This was a man who'd been in court many times, who'd know what to do in whatever form he could to try to sway the jurors in his direction. There were tears. He wanted the jurors to understand that he was a loving, grieving father, and there was no way that he could have killed those people.
When Alec Murdaugh is confronted with the damaging kennel video that was found on Paul's cell phone, everyone was on the edge of their seats, wondering how was he going to explain himself?
Get back. Get back.
After a video was discovered on Paul Murdaugh's phone with his father's voice on it, this completely contradicts what Alec had been saying, that he was not at the dog kennel. And now it was time to see what Alec had to say about it for himself.
Mr. Murdaugh, is that you on the kennel video at 8:44 p.m. on June 7th, the night Maggie and Paul were murdered?
It is.
Were you, in fact, at the kennels at 8:44 p.m. on the night Maggie and Paul were murdered?
I was.
Did you lie to Sled Agent Owen and Deputy Laura Rutland on the night of June 7th and told them that you stayed at the house after dinner?
I did lie to them.
So now he's saying that he was actually there. And even though he's admitting it and being straightforward with the jury, this is still not good for Alec Murdaugh.
When it came to the murders, he had no choice but to admit that he lied. The videos proved it.
It's okay. Come here.
As my addiction evolved over time, I would get in these situations or circumstances where I would get paranoid thinking. It could be anything that triggered it, coupled with my distrust for Sled, caused me to have paranoid thoughts. On June the 7th, I wasn't thinking clearly. I don't think I was capable of reason. And I lied about being down there. And I'm so sorry that I did.
You continued lying after that night, did you not?
But once I lied, I continued to lie, yes, sir. Oh, what a tangled web we weave.
So if you're someone who's been skeptical of Alec Murdaugh, now you're hearing this and you're thinking to yourself, he's just using his drug addiction as an excuse to lie to everyone.
So you're taking 60 a day or something like that? I mean,
There were days where I took more than that.
It seemed like it was a lot of pills and the damage it could do to his internal organs. And could you really function on 60 pills a day?
As I took more and more, and over the years, it just, you know, you build up a tolerance to pain pills. Opiates gave me energy.
He got torn up on social media about that.
Then Alec reminds us all again that a nameless, faceless social media vigilante still angry over the Mallory Beach boat crash is really the person responsible for the murders.
I believe that boat wreck is the reason why Paul and Maggie were killed. The social media response that came from that was vile. I can tell you for a fact that the person or people who did what I saw on June the 7th, they hated Paul Murdaugh and they had anger in their heart.
He's talking about himself and not talking about the vigilantes he refers to. Because I think that Alec is projecting his own anger that he had toward Paul for putting his dynasty in jeopardy, creating all kinds of financial problems, about to tarnish his image.
But he was never able to pinpoint who might have done it or who actually was attacking Paul. So it took away from the value and the power that he was trying to pull with that statement.
Then the defense team brings in Tim Pomback. He is a crime scene analyst and blood spatter expert, and he actually suggests that the double murder is the work of two shooters.
The reason that we believe there are two shooters is there are two guns. Why have two guns if it's one shooter? It just doesn't make much sense.
Paul Murdaugh was shot twice, once in the chest and once in the head, while Maggie Murdaugh was shot a staggering 5 times.
They were trying to claim the shooter had to be about 4 foot tall to be able to commit the murder with Paul because of the angle that was coming up and the number of shots that were fired both at Maggie and Paul at that point. And the prosecution was able to come back with Dr. Kenny Kinsey.
I've worked approximately 800 death scenes in my career. I would describe myself as Andy Griffith with a crime scene background. I don't dumb it down for the jury. I bring the jury down to my dumb level. And explaining evidence doesn't have to be that difficult. The average man and woman, they just want to be able to form their own opinion. We actually went to Moselle, went in, did my own measurements, just verifying what the original crime scene examiners had documented.
Are you confident that the direction was correct on this?
Yes, sir. I have no reason not to believe the direction. Adjacent to that kennel is a room where they kept their supplies. And when Paul was shot, by the blood evidence, he was standing upright halfway in that feed room, and he was looking away from the door, and that's when the first shot hit Paul. And that shotgun was discharged in very close proximity, an arm's length away from Paul. Something caused Paul to turn at the last minute when that shot was fired, and he was moving really, really slow, going toward that door. His shoulder and his head breached that door. That's when he sustained a fatal wound, and it exited out of the top of his head. Miss Maggie was shot with a .300 blackout rifle. Miss Maggie comes running up. She moved out 4 or 5 feet, maybe 10 feet, and that's where she sustained the first fatal wound. I believe she was down on the ground in a crawling position, and the shooter went behind her, and she's face down. And then the last shot was into the top of the head. It's just overkill. I believe Alec Murdaugh killed Maggie and Paul Murdaugh. It doesn't make sense with 2 shooters. We know Maggie surprised the situation with Paul. Maggie was running up towards Paul. So if there were 2 shooters, whoever the second shooter was would have went straight to her. And if they did it, they'd do it simultaneously. So it just makes no sense.
What is your opinion of the defense's expert that says the shooter could not have been 6 feet 4 inches tall like the defendant, Alec Murdaugh?
I see nothing that could exclude a 6'4" shooter.
So the defense's theory was able to be countered by Kinsey, who then became a social media darling because of his demeanor.
He spoke English to the public. They fell completely in love with him.
I think the theory is preposterous, in my opinion.
The jury had now heard testimony from over 60 witnesses, and now the world braces itself for closing arguments that will determine the fate of Alec Murdaugh.
As the closing arguments get underway, this is really an opportunity for the prosecutor, Creighton Waters, to take center stage.
We couldn't bring you any eyewitnesses because they were murdered. But common sense and human nature can speak on behalf of Maggie and Paul. And they deserve a voice. You have to bring some emotion to it and remind the jury that you never want to forget that there are victims at the heart of this. She heard that shot, was running to her baby when she got mowed down by the only person that we have conclusive proof was at that scene.
A lot of little things that sort of add up in this circumstantial case. But Paul's phone dispelled the biggest lie that Alec told, which is that he was never at the kennels with Maggie and Paul the night of the murders. This was going to be incredibly damning to Alec.
One man controlled this crime scene initially, and that was Outlaw. Don't let him fool you too. I ask you to return a verdict of guilty.
Alec did not kill his family.
I don't know why they call it argument. I'm not here to have an argument with you.
And at the end of the day, you're staring at some jurors and trying to talk to them. And that's really what I tried to do in my closing, was to talk to them.
On behalf of Alex, on behalf of Buster, on behalf of Maggie, and on behalf of my friend Paul, I respectfully request that you do not compound a family tragedy with another. Thank you.
On March 2nd, after 6 weeks of trial, I was floored by how quickly that jury reached a verdict.
I will say I am shocked. The deliberation was only 3 hours.
Usually when a jury comes to a decision that fast, it does not bode well for the defendant.
My producer telling us that the jurors say they do, in fact, have a verdict.
The State versus Richard Alexander Murdaugh, defendant. Indictment for murder, guilty, verdict. The State versus Richard Alexander Murdaugh, defendant. Indictment for murder, verdict, guilty.
Doesn't matter how much money you have or people think you have. Doesn't matter how prominent you are. If you do wrong, if you break the law, if you murder, then justice will be done.
He's currently doing 2 life sentences in state court. I think Alec Murdaugh was wrongfully convicted, and so I'm totally deflated, completely deflated. But until we find the real killer, no one will believe me, right?
And I remember just a sense of elation, like just relief, because the last thing I wanted to happen was for us not to deliver justice.
Now they're being called out. Now people know who he is and what he is. He's evil. He is evil.
There had been a huge social media, presence. Many people felt like a statement was made. And the statement was, nobody's going to get away with this.
Between yesterday morning and the end of sentencing today, there were more than 99,000 posts about the trial.
Alec doubted whether he can get a fair trial. He had hope in the jury, but he was disappointed. All that disinformation and social media worked its way into the minds of the jury.
The Alec Murdaugh saga will likely be with us for as long as Alec lives and probably even afterwards. But as recently as September 2023, some brand new information surfaced that really sparked some new hope for Alec that he could wiggle out of all of it.
And here we go again. This is a bombshell filing and bombshell accusations now from Alec Murdaugh's defense attorneys.
They're saying Clerk of Court Becky Hill from Colleton County actually tampered with the jury.
Allegedly, the clerk told them, don't let the defense distract you. Then right before Alec testified, she said, don't be fooled by him.
They say that the clerk pressured jurors to reach a guilty verdict so that she could profit off of it all.
Becky Hill wrote a book right after this trial. And if you don't get a guilty verdict, will it still sell quite as well?
In November of 2023, police questioned Becky Hill and the majority of the jurors. And in an affidavit signed by Becky Hill, she denied the numerous allegations made by Murdaugh's legal team.
That was totally unprecedented in my experience and jaw-dropping. So we have filed a motion for a new trial.
A few months after the verdict came down, finally a settlement in the Mallory Beach lawsuit. Paul was about to stand trial, but he was killed. Her family alone in that settlement got $15 million from the convenience store that sold Paul the alcohol that day.
Mallory loved animals, and we have started the foundation, Mouse Pals, as part of keeping her memory alive. I just don't want to see her get lost in the Murdaugh mess.
Here's a section of the official statement released by Buster Murdaugh regarding the Stephen Smith case. These baseless rumors of my involvement with Stephen and his death are false. I unequivocally deny any involvement in his death, and my heart goes out to the Smith family.
I've always talked about a second autopsy because I did not agree with the pathologist because she had ruled Stephen's death pedestrian versus vehicle, and I knew that wasn't true. We got the autopsy done, and finally SLED ruled his death homicide. So SLED reopened Stephen's case, and I was elated. It was the first time I was able to cry joyful tears instead of sad tears. And they told me they're getting closer to the end.
Gloria Satterfield's financial case now continues to still be in the court system. We have a judgment of $4.3 million that we intend to collect. And they're not going to let Alex Murdaugh rest simply because he was convicted of double murder.
From the very beginning, I had said that the Murdaughs could not survive social media, and that ended up being true in probably the most epic of ways. He no longer has control over the community. It's a different community. It doesn't belong to the Murdaughs.